My name is Ru Arana. I am known as the queer-friendly barber. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. I am operating out of the Barbashop in Austin, Texas on the east side. And I've been in the industry roughly 3 years. Before that, I was cutting hair for a solid 10 plus years, maybe 12. So I've been cutting hair since I was about 15. But all of those, that decade of experience was like garage haircuts, bathroom haircuts, kitchen haircuts, and everything within the 3 years has been like a much more exponential growth in terms of skill set and movement in the career, especially because that license really opens up a million doors. The favorite aspect of my job, aside from my sole purpose of creating a safe space for the community, for queer, trans, and gender nonconforming people, and giving them gender affirming hair care and respecting them and seeing them for who they really are. Aside from that, honestly, it's connecting with a lot of different people with a lot of different beliefs, and going through a lot of different things in their life. Simultaneously, it's pretty cool to have that network and that kind of spider web of resources to go through and almost share internally within the community to say, oh, you need a mechanic? Let me check with this person. Oh, you need a doctor? Got you. You need a therapist who is very, a therapist who is in the BIPOC community? I got you. And that can sometimes be a lot of work, but simultaneously, as the barber, and any barber, so many different kinds of people, and that to me is pretty cool. Being queer influences my work by moving intentionally and strategically through the barber world, specifically as the barber. The barber world traditionally has typically been a space for cis men, right? And so sometimes it can be and naturally create a really cis heteronormative space, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not everybody, and so it's really important to create another environment, right? To create an environment where I can flourish and somebody in my community can flourish just as easily. So there's so many joyful experiences within the barbershop, right? Across the board, right? Whether it's where I'm at or somebody else, where you're at, right? The joyful experiences is you get a sick cut. You get to be served in this really beautiful way. You get somebody to touch your crown and your head, which is so powerful, and your soul lives there, right? And who touches your head other than a parent or a lover or somebody who you trust really, really well. So keeping a lot of the joyful experiences of the barbershop and ridding of other experiences that doesn't necessarily serve my community. So ridding of assuming somebody's gender or pronouns or sexuality or whatever. And instead asking specifically for pronouns, right? Hey, what are your pronouns? Cool. Right off the bat, I usually start off with that. And I think that is so important for everybody, regardless of your gender, regardless of, how you were born and how you exist now, etc. Pronouns matter. So, because it's important to normalize them everywhere. Yeah, so I think there's kind of 3 aspects to this. I think at the bare minimum, safety. Safety is one of the biggest factors for so many people who have previously come to me and said, hey, I've had the experience of asking for this, and I ended up getting a completely different look. That's probably one of my clients' most common experiences when they come to me with a negative experience. That's typically it. Hey, I asked for something really short and I got something that was not it. I showed a picture and I got this and it was not it. And it's, creating something that feels safe. I am showing you this. I trust that this is what we're going for, and therefore I feel safe whenever I look in the mirror and I am affirmed by, oh, I'm getting exactly what I'm asking. The second aspect would be representation. Representation is so important. It was so important for me, and it still is. And I cannot ever operate the whole entire business that I'm operating happily without the community. Like, I just wouldn't be doing it, right? I can't be doing it without without being met on the other side. So having representation across the board for everybody, right? Somebody who's trans masculine, somebody who's trans feminine, the aspect of gender, transness. Do you have to take medical intervention to be trans? No, you can be valid, right? You can be valid and take whatever medical interventions. You can look one type of way and have pronouns that may not necessarily be affiliated, and that's totally fine too. But all these things were so important for me growing up, and as I slowly started to either find them or as I started to, honestly, like, YouTube was such a lovely resource growing up, because there's Texas is small, you know, Texas is ginormous, of course, but in terms of the queer energy, Austin, Texas is the most intense energy I've ever experienced. I'm sure that you, in whatever community you identify with, Josh, you see yourself like, oh yeah, this is like, I'm sure this is like extremely open, at least more so than Texas. So, and then that third aspect is the community, going beyond the safety aspect, bare minimum, through the representation aspect of like, okay, now we're kind of sharing space. Now we're kind of like putting our faces out there. We're taking up space in really proud ways that sometimes feels terrifying, right? It's terrifying sometimes to be really proud of who you are, especially because it's a process. It takes some time to get there. Taking it a step further and seeing, how can I support the community, right? I'm supporting the community by serving gender affirming hair care, but what else can I do? Where can I put money in people's pockets? What resources can I share with people that are free? There's a couple things. I think at the minimum, everyone can be inclusive in their language. That you can do by checking in with people, right, about pronouns, as I mentioned earlier. That you can do by in whatever sentence you're saying, not necessarily limiting whatever options you might be saying, like, hey, do you have a girlfriend? What about, hey, do you have a partner? Hey, do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Sure, if you know. And then also, to take it a step further, not being afraid to speak up and say something when you kind of know, like, oh, that doesn't sound like the right definition of this word, or, oh, I definitely know that this person's pronouns are different. Let me correct you real quick. Let me call you out real quick. Because these are things that sometimes feel like such big conflicts, but when everyone in the community is doing it, it takes the person who's living in the conflict in their head, like that person who was sitting outside of the barbershop for hours. And it is so helpful for somebody else to say, hey, I see you. I'm going to say something and you don't have to say it. Because maybe if you took every opportunity to say something, maybe you would say something 12 times a day. Maybe you would say something 50 times a day, depending on like whatever circumstances and interactions you're going through. So it really goes a long way to be inclusive, and not just for gender, sexuality, not just for race, not just for ability, not just for disability. Like, you just want to pay attention to, like, well, what words are coming out of my mouth, and how is my English language or Spanish language or whatever, how is this language limiting whatever else? I think language in itself can be extremely limiting, and I think just starting there is like ginormous leaps. Last thing I would say is for people to, if they have a little bit more effort, a little bit more energy to give, to find resources, right? Find some resources that would be helpful for whatever communities that you'd be dealing with. Find therapists to give out. Something that can be really easy to say, hey, I'm not equipped for this. However, I got this phone number, boom. Give out hotlines and just have it, do your homework one time, write it down, put it on your station somewhere, and just have it ready for anything that could come up in terms of mental health, being inclusive, being educated, being informed, learning how to be consensual, right? Learning how to be professional. What's okay to ask? What's not okay to ask? What should you maybe Google? And what should you go read a book? And what should you maybe say, I don't know if this is okay. However, let me ask and see, and I will respect whatever answer you give, right? But there's a couple different tiers there for whatever energy and comfort level people have. And I definitely think that it's everybody's job, but I think it's like cis people's jobs to like normalize pronouns and like help to create the safe space that like everybody else is existing and operating in, because that is really helpful. And it's going to be really helpful to know in that case whenever people are like doing the work to be more inclusive.